This paper was presented at the JCT Traffic Signal Symposium 2025. Video coverage of this paper is provided by Highways News and sponsored by Mobius Networks, AGD, Smart Micro UK, TRL Software, Traffic Group Signals, AD Electronics, and 4-Way Consulting.
I'm Sam and I work in the consultancy services team at YUNEX. This afternoon I'm going to be talking a little bit about roundabout optimization. You'll all know that a poorly optimized roundabout can cause thousands of hours of delay every year. Yet, despite this, many roundabouts are left untouched after they're installed, and I think that's especially true for those that are running MOVA. Why? Because MOVA at roundabouts is often seen as complex, maybe even a little bit of a dark art. But what if that perception is actually just holding us back? What if there is still untapped capacity in the network? So today I'm going to share 2 bits of research that explore exactly that and show how offset optimization can make a real difference. So what are we going to go through? Well, today I'm going to take you through 2 different ways that we can use MOVA to control roundabouts more effectively. We'll start with a fresh look at an already established technique for single stream roundabouts and show how making a small tweak to it can make a big difference to delay. Then we'll come on to something that's a little bit more complex towards the end, looking at a linked strategy that uses offset optimization to unlock more capacity at larger roundabouts. Then to wrap things up at the end, I'll share a short thought piece on where I see the future of roundabout control going. But before we dive into that, just to set the scene a little bit, we all know that getting the offsets right is key to getting the most capacity out of a roundabout. The goal of it is simple. We're trying to keep as many approach arms running at the same time while still providing coordination and progression through the circulatories. And that principle is well understood. We've got tried and tested techniques like sequencing in an anti-clockwise manner so that we can get overlapping entry greens. These strategies can build in inefficiencies though. So if we take the example that's on the screen, imagine that we're controlling this with UTC. We've only got these 2 nodes to worry about. We've written a plan that clears the westbound off-slip queue perfectly. We've got a nice offset to the northern node, a negative offset, so the front end of the platoon arrives just at the eastern circulatory as it's getting green. Everything seems to be perfect. But then maybe on the next cycle, traffic dips on that off-slip and we can clear that queue during the minimum green period and we gap back out to the circulatory. All of a sudden, that offset to the northern node is way off. We've still got the interstage time to run through, the run-in time, all while that eastern circulatory is just sat at green, serving no one. So essentially, we're just wasting time. This isn't just a problem for UTC. Because MOVA users, it's a problem for MOVA as well, because the coordination logic often relies on hitting maximum timers so that we can achieve overlapping entry greens. If we run the slip road for anything less than the maximum timer, we lose our overlapping entry green and we start to waste time. So the question is, how do we overcome these potential inefficiencies? And that's what led me to the first part of my research, which was looking at smaller single stream roundabouts. Now, for those that are familiar with controlling small roundabouts, you'll know that there are times when you can only run one entry arm at once, something like the staging that's shown on the slide. The problem with this setup has always been the same. The next entry arm can only get green at the same time as its downstream circulatory link, which is incredibly inefficient. And when MOVA was first implemented on roundabouts like this, it used this sort of staging. And some research then sparked some research that showed that CLF could be implemented with optimal offsets and could actually significantly outperform MOVA. That then led to the development, which was for something which is now known as microstage control. The principle of it is quite simple, but it's very effective. You take the core single approach only stages and you insert in between them these short stages where you force the overlapping entry green. These stages can only appear for a short amount of time, but they give mover the opportunity to make a safe end of stage decision. And it worked. The test showed it was more effective than CLF. Great. But there's a little bit of a catch to this strategy. Microstage control works by staying in the single approach only stage until end of saturation has been found. But what if that's not the best way? So, oh sorry, I've missed a bit. Let's go back a slide. If we imagine that we're in stage 1, if we cleared all of that traffic while in stage 1 and there's no one else coming, the interstage of a 1 to 2 move and then on to 3 is simply just wasting time. Ideally, what we would have done would be to end stage 1 earlier, maybe even by up to 10 seconds. But of course, that's quite difficult to get mover to do. But that led me on to develop a modification to the existing strategy, which I've simply just called Microstage Plus. Now, the issue is that the current strategy holds the single approach only stage until it finds end of saturation, and that's where the inefficiency starts to creep in. So to address this, I changed how the strategy works. So instead of just using the standard X loop mimics, I set up some new detectors on the links. So where on the diagram you can see detectors 51 to 55, these used to be raw X loop mimics, so you would see values like 2 or 3. But now we only activate these detectors when we actually want to. And instead of waiting for mover to find end of saturation, we force it to find it immediately, meaning that we can get through the stages as quickly as possible. So as an example, if we take phase F at the bottom on link 5, if you imagine you've got a queue of 7 cars on there, starting at stage 2 and cycling through, if we ran stages 2, 3 and 4 for an absolute minimum, we could actually be quite confident that we could clear that traffic during the interstages. Whereas the previous strategy would be holding in stage 3 until it had found end of saturation. Then the interstage of a 3 to 4 would really just be wasting time. But because we forced mover to find end of saturation, it means that we can get through the stages much quicker. But of course, if the queue was any longer, forcing that end of saturation would be the wrong thing to do. So what the strategy does is says, if the queue has extended beyond the X loop, then we output to our dummy traffic links on our new X loop mimics. That means that we only stay in stage 3 for as long as we need to. Anything less than a queue to the X loop, we cycle through much quicker, confident that we can clear that queue during the interstages. Why isn't it working? Here we go. Of course, it all sounds great in theory, but does that actually work? Well, to find out, I ran some simulation modeling to compare the existing microstage strategy against Microstage Plus. I did that with 3 different flow scenarios, so low, medium, and high. What I found was that at the low flows, the results were the strongest, and the overall average delay at the roundabout reduced by 23.5%. Medium flows, so where we've got occasional cycles of oversaturation, we're still seeing benefits of around 6%. Then high flows, when the roundabout's completely overloaded, the results are fairly comparable, which makes sense because once traffic queues back beyond the X loop, the strategies essentially behave the same way. So the takeaway from this is, just by making a simple modification really to an existing strategy, we can actually deliver some significant delay savings. So with small roundabouts covered, I wanted to take the principle of improving offsets and take it to a larger, more complex roundabout to see if I could do something with it. And for this, I used M621 junction 2. Now, this roundabout has a very dominant movement through it throughout the day. So traffic enters from the north and it circulates round onto the westbound on-slip. And as I said, one of the challenges with mover linking is that it can create inefficiencies. So for example, if the westbound off-slip runs a short green, anything less than its maximum timer, we'll lose that overlap entry green. And and the slip road and the northern circulator at end green at the same time. And then with a long run-in, that's quite a lot of wasted time. And typically to get around this, you could set a low override timer, but that has to be balanced against queues on the off-slip. So taking the example that's on the screen, if we imagine that this platoon is circulating round the roundabout, by the time the tail end of it clears that eastern circulatory, we can work out that the northern node's circulatory stage will have timed off its minimum green period. If the northern node was to then switch to its approach stage, we can further work out that the westbound off slip would get around 9 seconds of green before it's then forced back to the circulatory again. If we had a queue of, say, 4 cars on that slip road, that offset between the two nodes would seem perfect. But if we had a queue of between maybe say 5 or 6 cars, ideally what we would have done is hold that northern circulatory at green just that little bit longer, just long enough so that we can keep the offsets between the two nodes optimal. So what I did, it led me to develop a strategy and implement it here, where the back hold timer, it doesn't just have a fixed maximum. Instead, the length of the hold becomes dynamic, and it's calculated as a function of 3 different things. So we take the expected time to clear the queue on the off slip, and then we minus off the interstage time of that northern node and the expected run-in time. Then that gives us a much more responsive system. So whether you've got a queue of 4 cars, 7 or 11 on that slip road, the front end of that platoon coming down from the northern node always arrives at the eastern circulatory as it's getting green, just as the slip road queue clears, and we're keeping that offset optimal every single cycle. And if we look at what happens to the northern node when we introduce the variable backholds and we compare it to having just a single fixed maximum, we can see that with the dynamic backholds, the average green time on that circulatory drops by about 9 seconds, but the green time for the approach stays somewhat similar. And we can also see that we get fewer longer green periods on that approach and an overall shorter cycle time. So what we're seeing there is it's becoming more responsive, and ultimately it's helping us to increase capacity. So what does all this potentially mean then for the future of roundabout control? Well, the key takeaway for me is that responsive roundabouts aren't just a concept. They're achievable today, and I think the exciting part, for me at least, is that I feel we're only just scratching the surface of what's achievable within the existing network. If we're to look ahead, the big game changer is going to be advanced detection technologies. If you imagine replacing or complementing loops with video-based systems or V2X, we're no longer just counting vehicles, we're identifying their type, their size, their exact location. That level of detail can give us a much clearer picture of what's happening on every approach. If we were to then combine that with circulatory data, all of a sudden we're talking about highly refined linking strategies where we could optimize the offsets in real time. So I mean, the future isn't just about adding capacity, it's about smarter data-driven control, and I think that's where the next big leap is going to come from. But the question now is, how quickly can we integrate these technologies into practice? Because the sooner we do, the sooner we can unlock a more efficient road network for everyone. Thank you very much for your time. If anyone has any questions.
Thanks very much indeed for, again, very interesting presentation, and of course, right on time. Any questions? Come on, audience, you've got to play your part. Mark, again. Are there any upstairs?
Are there any upstairs? Because I'd happily yield to someone up there if there's a question.
Mark, carry on.
Sam, you kind of started going towards that at the end there with the advanced detection. Could you just say a few words about the mix of traffic types and the effects of their ability to pull away across the stop line and how that might affect the strategies you were discussing? You know, a lot of HGVs make a hell of a difference.
Yes. Yeah. Of course, as I said, if we were talking about optimizing offsets in real time, if we knew we had, say, 3 HGVs on the circulatory, you might hold that northern node off for an extra, 8 seconds or something, because you know the saturation flow is going to have dropped.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Well, I have a question. Is, you did your evaluation. Did you do an evaluation against an equivalent fixed time plan with the coordination?
No, I considered it. I did this in my own time.
Okay, right. Say no more.
No. I did consider it, but I thought because the original micro-stage strategy was already proven to outperform CLF, I didn't see the need to further go back. It was just comparing what was seen as already optimal.
I suppose fundamentally it depends on the variation over the day with the arm,
Yes.
the flows coming in and out of the arms,
Yeah.
where MOVA would give the benefits.
Yes.
Okay, well, thanks very much indeed. That was really another good presentation.